Hello, day 3. Welcome to the first and probably not the last of my late night Bible videos, as I am about to round out my day and then remember, pants, there's nothing for tomorrow. Still with my Christmas decorations up. It's okay, I'm going to do them tomorrow. Okay, let's do day 3. Let's do Genesis 5 and 6. Interesting chapters. Firstly, a whole list of generations. We know that legacy is really important to God. We know that even just tracking the humanity of the God story is something that happens right the way through the Bible, and God cares about the generations. He cares about the legacy that we're a part of and that his son is a part of. And so we have this whole list of names that we're probably not that familiar with. But just to pull out a couple of observations from that, the first is that right at the beginning, it starts talking about Adam and his son Seth. And, you know, last time we just talked about Cain and Abel. And I think it's so interesting that when everything goes wrong with Cain and Abel, when sin comes into the world and messes in that family and disunity comes and everything plays out, in a sense, both of Adam's sons are stolen by sin, you know, one through death and one through the kind of rejection of relationship that came with sin. Really, both Cain and Abel are stolen from him, but God gives him a third son called Seth, which kind of means substitute. And I'm just struck by the heart of God in that whenever something is stolen from us, whenever the enemy robs us of something in our lives, God's heart is always, right from the beginning of time until now, to replace what it is that we've lost. And so I just want to say to any of you guys watching this today, if you feel like the enemy has taken some victories in your last year or robbed something precious from you, God's plan is always to repay and even go above some of the temporary victories that we see Satan appear to have in our lives. It's never the last word. God always has the last word. And so here he is doing that in Adam's life too. I think that's amazing. Another name that maybe we're more familiar with out of Genesis 5 is Enoch. And we hear about Enoch walking with God. What does that really mean? It means that he walked with God in faith. He consistently believed what God had to say in his life. He walked in God's light, which means he chose to do the things that God wanted for him to do. He lived a life that was godly. But he also walked with God in agreement. And that means that he didn't just do godly things out of obligation or fear. He did them because he agreed that they were right. And in doing those things, in walking in faith and light and agreement, he had this unique relationship with God where, you know, it feels like they had a relational closeness, a proximity. And we know now that we all have access to that same relationship with God too, where we can actually walk with him, be in his presence, be close to him, speak with him openly and honestly. We don't have to put up a facade. We don't have to perform in a certain way. And the thing I love about hearing about Enoch is that it says that he walked with the Lord, and those are the same words that we hear about Adam and Eve in the garden. So in our perfection, we walked with the Lord. And then sin came, and maybe it feels like sometimes we can't have that same closeness with God again. But then here we are a few generations later, and Enoch is also walking with the Lord. And for me, that just gives me hope that we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to be sinless to be close to God. It's actually not circumstantial, it's a choice. Some of the lifestyle choices that Enoch made meant that he could have this incredible relationship with God, to walk with him. And we can choose that too. So I think there's some really beautiful things from Genesis 5. Genesis 6 kicks off into a wild time with some spiritual beings and some women and some babies and some kind of a couple of verses that are written that you're like, wait, I need a whole book on that. What is happening? But essentially, you know, what we've got is a humanity that is starting to no longer track with God's will. And, you know, it doesn't expand for us all of the different ways that they are stepping away from God. But we can imagine, we know humanity, and we know the lows to which we can seek and the depravity that can come into humanity. We know the way that we can hurt each other, the way that we can... You only have to, you know, read news headlines right now just to know that humanity, left to our own devices, we don't make great decisions, and we really can mess things up for ourselves. And that's what's happening in this context where we get introduced to Noah. But it's really interesting, you know, just reading about these these Nephilim and these giants that are walking on earth, and the fact that they are starting to interbreed with mankind, God had to stop that and had to create a new, fresh start, because that began to jeopardize the promise of the Savior to come, who would be born of woman and should not be in any way associated with the angelic power that the humankind are kind of getting intertwined with in this season of history, because he had to be Son of Man and Son of God and not have any power or might or authority given its credibility from anything else. So basically what God is saying is, no, I need a human race. And that is a part of what brings about the Great Flood, is the need to start again and have a human race. But also it's brought about by our sin and our decisions and probably some of the awful things that were happening in the earth at this time. And I'm always struck by the fact that it says that it grieved God's heart what was happening. We have to remember that God isn't unfeeling in the face of our sin. It hurts him. And when we sin, he grieves for us and for the consequences that we will face, and also for the potential that we are jeopardizing or sacrificing in our decision to sin. So it's very near to God's heart, the decisions that we make. But it goes on and says in Genesis 6 verse 9, Noah was a righteous man. And we know that we're not saved by our works. We're saved by grace. It's grace that saves our soul. It's grace, God's abundant generosity to us, that means that we can be forgiven of everything that we do and we can go and spend eternity with him. But actually, righteousness can save our life. Righteous living can put us in the right place at the right time, instead of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and kind of risking some serious consequences. I'm just always struck by the fact that grace saves our soul. This is not about performance, but when we make good decisions, righteousness can save our life. And that's exactly what it did for Noah. He was a righteous man. He lived in a godly way, and God selected him to be the person that would see out this incredible mission. And just finally, to kind of wrap up Genesis 6, we'll talk more about the flood tomorrow, I'm sure, but I think sometimes we can be really preoccupied as people with experience. What have we experienced? What have we got to offer based on our experience? I can't do that because I'm inexperienced and therefore unqualified. That's not really what we're learning from this story of Noah. He'd never experienced a flood. We don't even really know if he'd experienced much craftsmanship, but what God required was obedience. And I think sometimes for us too, we can place a little bit too much importance on experience and what we've done and seen before. And God is saying, I just require you to say yes to me, and I will give you everything else that you need. So I think that's a great introduction to Noah, and we'll talk more tomorrow.